Okay, as people are joining, we're going to get started. So first of all, thank you again for joining us today. My name is Colton Carroll, and we're here today to talk about organizational planning and reporting for nonprofits. So quick introductions. My name is Colton Carroll. I'm a Workday Workday nonprofit specific account executive. I focus on partnering with organizations between 300 and 350,000 employees, but Workday Adaptive Planning can work with all types of organizations. So I'm joined today by my friend and colleague, Zaid Ward from Active Cyber. Zaid, could you introduce yourself now?
Absolutely. Hey, everyone, this is Zaid Ward. I'm an adaptive planning implementation consultant here at Active Cyber. I've been involved in just about 60 adaptive planning implementations so far across a wide variety of industries and use cases. Very excited to talk today about nonprofit planning with you.
Awesome. And my background actually was also in implementation. So today you have two people that are very familiar with the product and under the hood. So Zaid, thanks for joining, and we look forward to your demo a little bit later. To get everyone familiar with the polls and the chats, I want to start off by saying in the chat functionality today, please start utilizing that. First and foremost, if you could just enter your name there and then put in something that you're particularly looking forward to seeing today or something that you would like to see today. We're going to do our best to make sure that we cover on all those topics. But if you have any questions along the way, I think there's about 160 people attending this. So it's going to be difficult to let you guys, have or voice your questions. So please put those questions in the chat box. We will do our best to get to them. And if we're not able to get to them today, we'll definitely follow up with you afterwards. So to start that off, we will start with a poll question. So if we could throw the first poll question up. Have you ever used a planning system before? So that will be the first question. The answers are no, never, yes, Workday Adaptive Planning, yes, a solution outside of Workday Adaptive Planning, one of our competitors, or yes, only Excel. Please take a moment to enter the question or answer the question. All right, and let's take a look. So the majority of you out there have only used Excel before, and 25% of you have actually used no system whatsoever. So, and then a chunk of you have used Adaptive, and then there's another group that has used another solution. So 25% of people have never used a planning solution before. So I appreciate you guys joining in today. There's going to be tons of stuff for you to learn. Those who have used Excel, that's something that, we typically see is people coming off Excel. So we'll talk a little bit about that. And then for those of you that have seen Adaptive or other systems, we look forward to your feedback as well. It's a quick safe harbor statement before we get going today. We'll talk about features and functionality that are currently available, but we may talk about some things that are in the future forward-looking features and functionality. And we just want you guys to be making decisions based on the functionality that we have today. So when I would start working, I started working with Adaptive basically in 2013. And at that point, I would work with lots of different organizations. San Francisco Travel Association was actually the first customer I worked with, and they were coming from an Excel planning phase. And it was pretty hectic. They had all these different systems. Some groups actually had their own database of systems, and they were pulling information from a myriad of places and trying to aggregate it all in Excel. And it was really, difficult for them. And it's something that we refer to at Adaptive as a static planning state, with all this confusion and trying to figure out where this information is coming from. And your group's just spending a lot of time collecting information. But with Adaptive, we really want to create an active planning state. Again, transitioning away from that static planning state. And in order to do this, we think an active planning state needs to have three things in terms of how the system's used. It needs to be collaborative, the process needs to be continuous, and the solution needs to be comprehensive. So collaborative in the fact that we want to get everybody involved. So typically what we'll see sometimes with organizations that are primarily using Excel is the finance and accounting teams bear the brunt of the majority of the work. We really believe that people, that the closest part of the business, the department managers, the program managers, the project managers, those are the ones that are going to be most accurate with entering in information. And so we want to make it collaborative and easy for them to enter in data, make it simple for them to know what they're supposed to do and what they're not supposed to do, but then also make it easy for finance to collect all that information and make decisions. We need a process that's continuous. So a lot of times when we talk to customers, they don't even have a forecasting process in place yet. And what we see with our customers is that the large majority of them have a forecasting process with Adaptive. And some of them even say that, hey, I don't even budget anymore. I just continue with my forecasting process, and the next month comes and I roll out my budget that happens to be for the next year. And last but not least, we wanted an active planning system or active planning process that's comprehensive. And we built a solution that's comprehensive enough and flexible enough to be utilized across all industries. You know, today we're specifically here to talk about nonprofits, but we work with oil and gas and startups and all different industries. And we built a solution that's configurable enough to work with any different industry. So if you're not familiar with Workday and Workday Adaptive Planning, if you didn't know, in 2018, Workday acquired Adaptive Insights at the time for $1.6 billion. It was a tremendous day. I was working for Adaptive Insights at the time, and we were really excited to be a part of Workday. The one thing that I saw early on was Workday's commitment to innovation. That was prevalent throughout the entire discussions and organizations, and everybody I talked to, it's all about innovation. And that culture, you know, is backed up by investing 30% of $3.6 billion back into research and development. So that's quite a bit of money, more than any other SaaS company out there. So Workday is really focused on planning for the future, and I think that's why Fortune recognized us as the #1 company in their Future 50 rankings, which ranks companies best positioned for future growth. On the adaptive planning side of things specifically, we have 5,200 customers today. 1,000 of those are actually nonprofits. We've always been really strong with working with our nonprofit community. Like I said, my first implementation was with a nonprofit, and we've had a consistent growth within that space for quite some time. I think the reason we've done so well is because our solution is really easy to use. We've received the highest user ratings across the board. And just recently, we're named a leader in Gartner's report on cloud-based financial planning and analysis tools. That was the 4th year in a row that we were named a leader. So that's pretty good recognition. So a little bit more about the nonprofit groups or some of the nonprofits that we work with today. You can see there's a myriad of different logos up here. Personally, Best Friends Animal Shelter is an account I worked with, and it's one that's near and dear to my heart. I tried to drag my dog over here, but he's hiding under the bed. But Best Friends Animal Shelter is the largest animal shelter in America, and you know they had a lot of issues with putting a budget together with a large group of collaborators. But one of the big things that they were struggling with a couple of years ago was there's all these hurricanes, and as we all know, there's been a lot of emergencies recently. And Best Friends Animal Shelter was trying to go down to Houston and figure out a way to help, collect some of the dogs that have been misplaced, and trying to figure out a way to financially allocate funds quickly during that time was really difficult. So they kind of just did it on the back of a napkin and said, hey, we need to do this, let's just go. That was really stressful for the finance team, obviously, trying to figure out if they could actually pay for this project. But that was one of the things that we worked with them on, and now they're utilizing the tool to do different types of what-if scenario analysis around all these different emergency scenarios. So one that I really love, and we'll get into a couple more stories before we jump into the demo. The American Student Assistance Group, they're based out of Boston. They're really focused on helping kids out of college once they have student debt, trying to figure out how to pay those debts back, and educating them on financial capabilities and being understanding of how you pay stuff back. And one of the biggest issues that they were having from a planning perspective was all these changes in regulations with how you can service debts and different rules and different federal changes, and projecting their revenue is really difficult. So they implemented Adaptive and figured out how to solve for that, which allowed them to be a lot more to figure out how to allocate their revenue more effectively to help with their mission. One of the things they said is our entire FP&A culture has shifted away from being reactive to proactive. And that's one of the things that we're really trying to do with Adaptive. Two more quick stories, and then we'll jump into the demo. The Leukemia and Lymphoma Society, people know pretty well, it's pretty well known, but it is the largest cancer or blood cancer organization in the world doing different research. And one of the big things that they're really trying to tackle, they're a large organization. They're around 1,500 employees today, and they have around 400 people actually involved in the budget process. Trying to figure that out without a system is really difficult. So they actually implemented Adaptive twice. They implemented it the first time and then made changes throughout that year to different systems and re-implemented Adaptive and did it in the same amount of time while adding a whole myriad of users and then making sure that they were brought into the fold. And what it really did is created an ability for their leadership to take in information quickly in a much more collaborative space to make better decisions for the organization. And last but not least, before we jump into the product, I wanted to talk about International Justice Mission. IJM is a global nonprofit human rights agency that brings rescue to victims of slavery, sexual exploitation, and other forms of violent oppression. They have 20 different distinct offices in 14 countries around the world and have around 1,200 employees. IJM was established really to serve these underserved areas, and they were using spreadsheet solutions to really figure out, how to plan and what their strategic initiatives did. When they implemented Adaptive, they were able to improve three distinct capabilities. One, just automation and efficiency improvements. Two, was having a single source of truth and enhanced visibility. And the third and most important was creating a culture of data-driven decision-making and accountability. So it's kind of a theme that you'll keep hearing is how do we transition the rest of this organization out of collecting information to driving decision-making on a timely manner. And we're here to try and help with that today. And hopefully we can show you how IGM was able to do that and how the rest of our customers are able to do that as well. So here I'd typically pause for questions. If you have any, please again, put them in the chat. But big picture, IJM was able to increase their planning efficiency by 30 to 50% for the planners, and which created a 50% acceleration in the annual budget cycle, which really streamlined a lot of their decision making. So with that being said, we're going to start the demo. Before we jump into the demo, we do have one more poll question, and it's going to be, what is your top challenge in making decisions for your organization? So 1, no central source of the truth with our data decentralized in too many systems and difficult to bring together. 2, no easy way to run financial models or scenarios. 3, stakeholders are too reliant on finance to run reports. There's no self-service information. Or 4, there's too much time compiling data and not enough time validating or gaining insights. And the number one answer is too much time compiling data and not enough time validating or gaining insights. Appreciate you guys participating and listening to me. I'll be manning the chat booth, so please ask questions. But for now, I'm going to turn this over to Zaid.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Colton. Perfect. So today, as we go through, we'll be focusing on a few main areas. The first is going to be how we can help empower some of our program directors and our program managers and analysts to really take ownership of the planning process, how easy we can make it to gather insights and make sure that we're able to make strategic decisions based on all of the information that we have available, and then also how we can respond quickly and with agility to changes as they happen, and conduct reforecasting as we need to while being able to socialize with relative ease. So just a few pieces of Adaptive Planning 101 here before we get started. Up in our top right corner, we have what we call the version selector. This is where we can travel across an unlimited number of plan versions. So this could be any of our budgets, forecasts, what if scenarios, and of course have access to our actuals version or our one source of truth. Then on our toolbar here, we've got a number of context filters. So we can move across time throughout our org structure, our organization, which our levels here, as we call them, are essentially the backbone of everything that we do within Adaptive. And then we can also use any number of context filters here on our dashboards to help hone in and focus our planning on specific segments and slices of our organization and of our planning exactly as we need to. Now, we'll be conducting most of our planning today through what we call active dashboards. And that essentially just allows us to plan and report and analyze on the same screen. So we don't have to waste time clicking around across different areas of the environment. And as we make our changes, we can immediately see what those impacts look like holistically across the organization. Now, our overview dashboard here is geared towards some of those higher level planners and executives who might have insight into our broad strategic initiatives across the organization. So here we can see a breakdown of our total available funding across those initiatives for the next year, as well as an outline of some of our funding donors by type. Now, I do notice here that our government received funding is currently the lowest proportion of our total available funding for the year. And given, everything that's been going on this year, I know that the government has made a lot of funding available to organizations such as ours. So from here, we might already start to think about how we can prioritize resources towards raising and applying for some of those government grants and funds. Then at the bottom here, our scorecard can allow us to gather some insights into how our organization is trending over time as we continue to change and evolve as an organization. Now, we're looking at a comparison of our months, quarters, and year over year for some of our key metrics here, our restricted versus unrestricted funding, and our activity costs and workforce costs. Now, we've been undergoing some pretty steady growth as an organization, which is of course reflected here for the most part in our funding as well as our costs. But I am noticing that for quarter over quarter, we're actually looking at a decrease in our activity costs, which is pretty meaningful for me because if we can somehow do more work and achieve more productivity while lowering our costs, there must be something there that we're doing correctly. And we'll certainly want to focus in on that and make sure that we can highlight those changes and spread them throughout the organization. Now that we've gotten a good overview of our high-level snapshot, we can start to think about conducting some of a mapping process. This is where we can start to align our high-level strategic initiatives with the specific programs that are supporting those initiatives, as well as assigning approvals and prioritization to each of those programs. The mappings that we're setting here are set globally. That means that everywhere throughout the planning environment that references any of these categories that we're mapping will automatically update based on the decisions that we make here. So as we can see on our program roster here for what we're currently working on, we've got some approvals in place, some priorities, and of course, those strategic initiatives are immediately visible as well. Now, since these are global mappings, this is really the first step that we're going to take in empowering all of our planners to take ownership of their pieces of the organization. The mappings that we set here can have large impacts across all of the reporting that we're using, as well as perhaps how we're planning some of our finances. As an example, we rely heavily upon reporting that only looks at our currently approved programs. So as we move programs around in their approvals, that'll actually have some substantive changes on the way that our finances look for us based on where we know each of those programs to be. Likewise, the priorities that we're setting here can help guide some of our planners toward allocating any of that unrestricted funding should they be faced with shortfalls or needing to make adjustments so that we can worry less about what's happening at the program and department level and just focus on ensuring that we've given all of our planners the tools that they need to be successful. Now, I can see here that we have a couple of programs that are missing approvals. And while we do only have a few programs in our roster currently, we certainly could in the future have many more. So we might want to utilize our drill down here and quickly highlight those programs that require our attention, programs A and E here, which will then allow us to set those approvals that we're missing. So just from contextual knowledge, I know that program E is still in the proposal stage, whereas program A has gone and been approved already. So we'll go ahead and save that. And likewise, we do have one program that's missing a priority, and that appears to be program B. Now, this is a pretty high priority program for us, so we'll go ahead and place that into priority number 1 and make sure all of those changes are committed. And we can verify visually on our program roster that each program now has an approval and a priority associated with it. Now, our executive team is going on a retreat for the next couple of weeks. We'll call it maybe a Zoom retreat. So it's critical now more than ever to make sure that we're well prepared so that should anything come up and should any quick adjustments need to be made to our plans, all of our program managers and directors will have what they need to make those changes effectively. So now that we've gotten that taken care of, we can go ahead and use our context filter here and drill down to one single program that we'll be focusing on. So this is where we can start to dive a little bit more into the details and start to look at things from both a tactical perspective as well as a strategic. Now, the first thing that we'll explore is just a review of our funding status for this program. And jumping out at me immediately is that we appear to have a bit of a funding deficit for January of the coming year. Now, I can see that the gap is primarily coming from our restricted funds. We're short just under $16,000. But our unrestricted funds that have been allocated toward this program are not quite sufficient to cover that variance. Now, this isn't a major gap and it's only for one period, so I'm not overly concerned, but it's certainly something that we'll want to make sure to address if we can, just to put ourselves into a more favorable position moving forward. We can also certainly review our active funds and grants here for the current program that we're exploring. And should we just want to verify that everything is moving as expected, we can go ahead and explore a particular piece of funding. So here we might be focused primarily on those unrestricted funds. We can see exactly how all of those dollars are breaking down and being spread across the organization and over time. So this can give us some quick reconciliation and give us confidence that what we're seeing is reflective of what we expect to be the case. So we can go ahead and make sure that we can make any planning adjustments that we need to cover this gap. So to do that, we'll go ahead and focus in on our cost drivers here. And what we're seeing is just one of many flavors of cost planning that we've seen within the not-for-profit segment. But the way that we've opted to break this down is to separate our activity costs, which would be our marketing, materials, office supplies, travel, any of those related expenses and spend categories, as well as our workforce cost. Now, our activity costs are being planned by spend category, whereas our workforce is being planned on an individual basis here. So we can really drill down and focus in on each of our employees by name and with all of their associated details so that we can get some really precise planning in place and know exactly where we stand at any moment as far as resourcing. Now, we are seeing still that bit of deficit for January 2021. Looks like our total costs for that period are right around 150,000, which is to be expected. It's about normal for us. Now, we'll need to try and make some decisions here around how we can cover that shortfall. So what we might look to do is break down those dollars into the spend categories. And here we can see that, as usual, materials and marketing are our main spend categories, the biggest contributors to our spending. But I can say almost for certain that we won't be doing a lot of travel in January. We don't expect things to be changing significantly. So this seems like it's probably an excessive amount of travel budgeting for us. So let's go ahead and decrease our travel budget for January of the coming year. And we can go ahead and call that an 80% decrease just for that single period. And that looks like it'll just put us into the right place. So we no longer have a projected deficit. And I think what we'll just want to do here is leave a note so that anyone reviewing our work knows what we've done. So now that we're in good shape here, we can certainly go on and take a quick review of our financials for the program, or we can zoom back out to the total organization and look at all of our programs as a whole. Now, since adaptive planning is built on what we call an in-memory cloud, we can actually pivot and segment and manipulate all of our reports exactly as we need to. So perhaps if I'm interested in looking at our total income across the year, broken down by program, I can go ahead and drag that slicer onto our income account. And there we can see all of our program level detail broken out across time, reflecting both our prior year actuals reflected in green, as well as our upcoming plan data reflected in black. Now, perhaps I've got some questions about some of the values that I'm seeing here. Certainly, I might need to go ahead and explore some of those values and drill down, and maybe just gather some insight into the account level breakdown of each of those numbers. Or I could go even further and dive deep into the numbers and see exactly how everything's being produced for us here. So we never have to have any questions go unanswered, and we never have to work too hard to find those answers. Now, I hope none of you have ever been in this situation before, but let's say maybe it's a Friday afternoon, 4:45, and we get an urgent email from maybe one of our supervisors or just from someone involved in our planning. And here my program director happens to have the same name as me. We'll leave that aside, but our program director is saying, Zaid, I've just gotten word about some upcoming changes to program B, and we need to reforecast as soon as possible. Here are the details. It looks like we're receiving additional restricted federal funding for the 2021 calendar year in the amount of $120,000. So I'm glad that we were able to actually act on that information we had about our government funding, and it looks like that will come through for us. Next, we expect this will lead to a 10% increase in materials cost and a 5% increase in marketing costs throughout the year. We'll need to hire as well a new program manager on February 1st at a $60,000 base. Please make these updates and put together an impact variance report for the executives. I need this back before the end of the day today. Now, I know that from our poll, a lot of you are working in an Excel planning environment, and I understand that in that environment, receiving something like this could of course lead to some emotions. Perhaps in a more ideal world, we've got some dinner reservations in jeopardy, but not to worry. We can go ahead and use all of the flexibility of adaptive planning to respond to that very quickly. So what we need to do here is a few things. First, we'll go ahead and put together a new scenario. So we'll actually go into what we call the back end or the administrative area of adaptive planning into our version control. Now, this is the place that, for one, is only accessible to the users that we've given access, and is also where we can manage all of those different plan versions that we have available. So what we'll need to do here is create a new scenario. Maybe we'll call that 1119. We can manage our access as we need to. So perhaps if we only want our board members or executives to see this or don't want them to see it, we can think about doing that from here already. We can make any adjustments related to time that we need to. And we can also define which plan our new scenario is starting as a basis from. So we'll go ahead and use that nonprofit plan that we've been working in so far. And we'll click save. And what's happening now is that adaptive planning is creating a carbon copy of that nonprofit plan version, transferring over all of the data, copying over every formula in the plan, recalculating everything, and making sure that we're ready to go and we can carry on planning without a hitch here. Now, certainly we've seen a huge increase in the velocity of these forecasts over the past year. And the great news is that since we can have an unlimited number of plan versions, we never have to worry about the impacts or any negative effects of creating a lot of scenarios. We always have the flexibility of doing this. So now that that's complete, we can go back and I'll just refresh my screen here. And if we open our version selector, we can see that plan is immediately available for us. I'll go ahead and drop us into program B, since that's where we're focusing our attention again. And now we're ready to make the adjustments that have been requested. So the first is that it looks like we're receiving some additional federal funding for the next year. So there we'll need to go ahead and call on our funds and grants sheet here. We do have one existing restricted government fund available, so we can go ahead and use that as a template for the new planning that we're doing. We'll update the amount here. And then we'll also make that run through the calendar year as we're expecting those funds to be delivered. Now, of course, for now, we're just doing some rough planning, so we can leave all of these text and informational fields as they are. But certainly we may come back later on and ensure that everything matches our expectations. And just as a quick spot check, we can come in and verify that everything is rolling out exactly as we expected. Those funds are being amortized over the calendar year as we've come to find from these agreements. And now we're ready to move on to the rest of our updates. So the next piece will be updating some of our cost drivers here. We're looking at a 10% increase in our materials cost. We have a number of options here for applying those changes as we make them, so we never have to worry about calculating manually or doing anything outside of the system. And we'll also go ahead and apply that marketing cost increase as well. So most of the way there, our last piece here is to just make that update to our workforce. Now, certainly as we're thinking about making a new hire, it's not necessarily as simple as just adding some additional costs to our marketing budget. Personnel come with a number of costs outside of just the salaries, which we'll need to take account of. And we also have to make a number of preparations outside of just the financial plan here. So what we'll go ahead and do is just start off with creating the new hire position in our individual workforce schedule here. And we have a similar profile that's already in place. I'll go ahead and make a copy of that. We can update our position here to program manager. And then we can assume that, of course, they're starting on February 1st as noted, and everything else can remain standard for us. So as we do that, a few things are happening. All of the selections that have been made elsewhere in the entry, so our tax residence, if we've got hourly assumptions for hourly personnel, some title or position related considerations, all of those different pieces are actually going to be contributing to the cost that we're expecting to be produced by this new hire. So as we look over here, when they start in February, we've got some recruiting fees that we know will likely incur. We've got some tax and fringe contributions that we need to be aware of. And we have a number of other components that always go into our new hire planning. So now with a really simple entry, we've been able to capture a full picture of what this looks like and what the impact will be across the organization. Now, as I mentioned, of course, new hires are not strictly financial. We may also want, of course, for our program managers to be a part of our adaptive planning environment and to get into the system and help us plan and start from day one without wasting too much time on getting trained and getting acquainted. So what we do in our organization is we've actually got a template for new adaptive users within that program manager role. And what I'll do is just go on and verify that that's set up and ready to go for our new planner. So we'll briefly switch hats here. I'm logged in now as our program manager. One thing that you may notice is that their access menu, their navigation menu is significantly smaller than ours was. Of course, this program manager is not an administrative user. They don't need to be bogged down with all of the options that the system has available. One thing our program manager will have, though, is our process and our workflow. So the way to think about this are really two pieces of the tool that will help us manage the decentralization and integration of the business planning process across all of our stakeholders. And what this will look like for our program manager is just by entering that program plan process, they'll now be presented with a list of tasks that belong to that process, some instructions relevant to the work that needs to be done here. Their access will be limited based on the role that they've been given within the system. So it could be to a single department or to a group of departments that they oversee. And they'll also be placed automatically in the active plan. So there's very little searching around. There's very little guess. Everything is laid out pretty much as easily as possible. And now our program manager just has to come in, follow some instructions or some comments that we have, conduct some planning, leave notes as necessary. And once they're complete here, we can go ahead and check that box and move on to the next task. Now, what's happening in the background from the administrative view of this is that everyone who's responsible for approving different pieces of the plan can see how our program manager is progressing through that plan based on the completion of these tasks. We have visibility into deadlines that are approaching. And should those deadlines be approaching faster than we'd like, we can go ahead and send out automated notifications to our program managers or any other planners in the system so that we can all stay on track. So this looks excellent to me. I think we're all ready for our program manager to come in and be effective from just about day one. So we can go back and just complete the last piece of that request from our program director. Now we've completed all of the planning here. The last thing that we're looking for is just a quick variance report to highlight some of the changes that we've made. Now we do have a few different options for doing that. All of the dashboard visualizations that we've seen here are constructed through drag and drop, so they're very easy to build. But I think what would be more fitting is for us to use our web reporting so that we can go ahead and print out Excel versions of this and socialize it across the organization quite easily. Now, given that many of you are using Excel, I'm sure you're familiar with pivot tables, and I'm sure you've likely had to put them together before. You'll be right at home here with our web reporting. All that we'll need to do is go ahead and select our accounts that we're reporting upon from our menu here, and we'll look at our program statement of activities. Everything will be reflected on the report with the same level of granularity that we've selected here from the menu. We can go ahead and pick our two versions that we'll be comparing against. So that's our nonprofit plan and our nonprofit scenario. We'll set a time period for us to report on. I think sensibly we'll look at FY 2021. And then we'll also make it so that we can change that time from the report as we're looking at it. Now, the last thing that we'll need to do here is just drop in a couple of variance columns. Now these are out of the box, so we don't actually need to calculate anything. And my mistake there. We can simply use that pre-built calculation, create a label so we know what we're looking at. And if we'd like to be extra thorough, we can go ahead and add a percentage variance here as well. And with that, just a handful of clicks in a couple of minutes, we're ready to go ahead and run our report. And there we can see that our major changes have come across our salary and wages, and we do have some percentage variances there. If we want it to be extra thorough, we could add in some conditional formatting or some visual flags. But for what we're doing right now, I think this will be sufficient. So now we're ready to go ahead and save our report. If we'd like, we can share it with any of our user groups or individual users. And we can go ahead and take a snapshot so that we always have a picture of what this report looks like right in this moment. So with very little strife, we've completed all of our additional planning there, and looks like we're just in time to make that dinner reservation. So no need to panic at all. Now, of course, our dashboards and the web reporting are excellent and give us a great amount of flexibility for all of our users within the system. But I would expect that many, if not all of you, also work with planners and stakeholders that need to see things in the familiar Excel environment. So in order to address those needs, Adaptive Planning has what we call Office Connect, which is simply a plugin for Excel, PowerPoint, and Word that allows us to produce completely live and dynamic reports. Each of the cells that's now highlighted is actually connected directly to our planning environment. So as we make changes, we can refresh our Excel reports. And for us now, we're actually gone ahead and closed out our December plan. So we want to reuse this report. A lot of the time, this would be a manual effort. We might need to copy and paste a lot of data, update labels, do some reconciliation, but let's not do that. Let's instead go ahead and simply turn our clock forward here. Go ahead and refresh our report. All of our data will update. Our standard Excel visualizations and formatting are in place, and everything is ready for us to go. So we can go ahead and socialize all of the work that we've done and make sure that everyone in the organization has the visibility that they need. Now, although Excel treats all of these as regular values, which means we can share these even with users, with members of our organization who aren't users of adaptive planning, we still maintain the flexibility and the value in the data that allows us to do things like exploring cells and going all the way back to the browser to see exactly how we arrived at the number that we're seeing there. So it's really the best of both worlds. Everyone gets exactly what they need, and we've been able to conduct all of our planning and respond to a last-minute scenario change with not too much panic at all. And with that, I'll go ahead and hand it back to you, Colton. Thank you, everyone, very much for your time and attention.
Thank you, Zaid. Appreciate the demonstration today. Again, if there are any questions that anybody has right now, please feel free to put them down in the chat section. But we do have a few minutes. So Zaid, not to put you on the spot or anything, but there are a couple of questions that I think we may be able to answer in the remaining time. The first one is related to Audit Trail. Could you take a couple of moments just to touch on Audit Trail and how that works?
Absolutely. So Audit Trail is actually an optional report. So you can set that for each plan or each actuals version. And what it does is actually keep a log of every change that's made throughout the system, along with information such as who made the change, when it was made and where, as well as the current and previous value. So as we're going through and doing reconciliation or doing our budget approvals, we always have a complete paper trail and know exactly what happened to get us to where we are. So although it's optional, I always recommend that all of our clients use that because of the amount of value that it provides.
Awesome. And we have one question on integration, and we can talk about this. So the question is, what's the process for integration with Microsoft Dynamics or other systems for historical information? And with Adaptive, we are data agnostic. I'll pass this over to you in a second, Zaid, and maybe you can even show just like what the UI looks like a little bit. But Adaptive is data agnostic. And what that means is that we're able to integrate with any system that has an open API. You can kind of think of it as if you guys are working in systems that you have today, and those systems, you can just basically go on Google and type in API documentation, there's an API documentation for a system, we'll be able to connect to it. The question is, have we connected to it before? Microsoft Dynamics, as well as a lot of other ERPs, we've done tons and tons of times, but still, every once in a while, there will be a new system that we haven't yet heard of. So if you guys are wondering, for any other systems, just take a look at the API documentation. But the rule of thumb is if they have an open API configuration, we can connect to it. Dave, is there anything you want to add in terms of integration?
No, I think you covered all the key points there. I'll just make a small plug for Active Cyber. We've got a remarkably talented integration team, and I don't believe that we've actually encountered a Cloud Connect system yet that we can't integrate to. So we're certainly happy to work with you there.
Awesome. One last question, and then we can wrap up for today. So is it possible to combine the forecasted budget and actual operation expenses in a one-page report? And the short answer to that is yes. And I think a great explanation of this, or a great opportunity, would be to schedule some time with one of our consultants to see how to build reports. But Zaid, in your experience, could you talk a little bit about how reports and teaching users how to use reports, how that typically goes?
Absolutely. So as part of our standard implementations, we typically do a handful of hours of virtual training sessions on reporting, which we actually find is plenty to get most of our users pretty confident and pretty comfortable in building, all three kinds of reporting that we looked at today. And we also typically will put together some reports for you based on samples that you're already using. So we make sure you're well prepared to do that. And, we found that a lot of our users become really independent in terms of reporting and are able to do quite a lot with, not a whole lot of training.
Yeah, I've seen similar things in my experience. Typically, when I see a bunch of reports that we have to build, I always ask the client when I was doing consulting, hey, I could build all these for you, but why don't I show you how to build one, and you probably can just build the rest of them and save some money. So that's what we typically end up doing. Well, I think we've answered all the questions for today. If there are any other questions that people have, feel free to contact us after this. But truly appreciate everybody's time and attention to today. Zaid, thank you very much for putting together the demonstration. And if anybody has questions for Zaid and more about Active Cyber, please reach out to him. And in terms of reaching out for questions about Workday Adaptive Planning, please reach out to me. We will be recording this, and we can send a copy out to the panelists. That was one of the questions that someone was asking as well. So we'll definitely get the recording done. And with that being said, enjoy the rest of your guys' day. Thank you for attending, and we'll see you guys soon. Thanks.